So it's not just your own code that you can debug into third-party code as well. And as an example, let's introduce a problem. So here in this application, I'm trying to use .NET User Secrets. .NET User Secrets is a .NET concept where you can add basically configuration values, key value pairs that are more secret. And basically it's a JSON file that's stored on your computer but outside of your Git repository. So it's normally somewhere in your user folder. And .NET then layers up these configurations. So there might be environment variables, there might be values in app settings, there might be values in your launch settings. If you're connected to something like Key Vault, it might be pulling in key values pairs from there, but also this user secret file, and it layers them up. So in this scenario, it's not working locally. I can't work out why, so I need to debug into their code to find out why. And I know that user secrets and this layering of configuration we're talking about is all set up as part of this builder. And I also know that I can debug into third-party code. So what I'm going to do is click here and press F9. So that's done a breakpoint. And now if I press F5 to start debugging, I've hit this breakpoint, and as I normally would if it was my own code, I'm going to F11 into it. So this has now stepped into third-party code. And if I hadn't have stepped into this assembly already, it might have taken a few seconds to download the symbols and to disassemble it. So you might see a progress bar for a few seconds there, but for me it was instantaneous because it was cached. There's a few things here. We can see that the XML comments are very nicely rendered, and some have, there's none here, but if it's got a hyperlink, it'll be a proper hyperlink. This is actually called reader mode, and I can toggle here so you can see the XML, or up here, I can turn off reader mode so see the full XML here. That was up here, and if I click here again, it's going to bring it back on again. There's also this IL code as part of the code vision thing. If I click on that, then we can see the IL. So this create builder just news up a web application builder. And if I F11 into it again, it's going to go into the web application builder constructor. So as usual, I can F10 and step through this code to see what it's doing. So it's newing up a new configuration manager, F10, adding some variables that have prefix ASP.NET Core, F10. So stepping through code is a great way of learning the code as well. So this is going into here, and we've got another constructor here, and it's possible that's doing something. So I'm going to F11 into this too. So that's actually moved over here. If I F11 again, now that's gone into here. Now it's worth pointing out that if you F11 in to a constructor, it's going to start off by doing the object initializers for the fields and properties and things. Don't press F11 again, you want to press F10 to continue. So I'm stepping through these object initializers, then I will land on the constructor. And here there's something quite interesting. We can see this purple line here, which if I hover over, it says code analyzed by predictive debugger. And we can see there's lines which are grayed out. So the predictive debugger has detected that it will not get to this bit of code. And the reason is because it knows that setting is not null, so this won't be executed. And it knows settings configuration isn't null either, so that won't be executed. And we'll see this again shortly. So if I carry on F10ing through, so this is setting the default context root. I don't need to step into this because that's not going to be related to user secrets. Carry on stepping, adding some environment variables with prefix.net, initialize, so I can step into this to see what this is doing. Now again, we can see grayed out bits, so we know that Rider knows it's not going to go into that. So without stepping forward, I can glance at these and know it's not going to hit these. We can see it's doing some other stuff. Now for time's sake, I know that user secrets aren't loaded in this file. If I didn't know that, I could carry on debugging through. But for now, I'm just going to step out of that. So Shift F11. I'm going to carry on stepping. Now this highlights that this is not foolproof because I have no idea why it steps over those two lines. But we can see it got confused, and it did. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a breakpoint here. So I wanted to show also that you can put breakpoints in third-party code and it will still stop there. And then if I rerun this, and then F5 to continue, so it's hit that breakpoint. And to avoid this jumping over again, I'm going to put another breakpoint here, and then F5. So that's worked. So I've no idea why it skipped those two lines, but it did. But that just goes to show that debugging third-party code isn't 100% foolproof. Because don't forget that, remember when I spoke earlier about debugging, how I said about debug and release mode? And the third-party code would have been compiled with release mode, so optimized assemblies. I'm going to talk in a bit about why we can actually do what we're doing here, but just for now, know that it's not 100% foolproof. So let me step into this one. So I'm going to step through this, and oh, we're loading like JSON files now, these app settings, so this feels close. And actually, I can see down here, it says add user secrets. So as I've stepped along, we can see that all of this grayed out. So the predictive debugger thinks that it's not going to get into here. In fact, this is grayed out as well. So it knows that it's not going to process to the right of this AND, which means that this must be returning false. So let's step into is development. F10. So clearly at this point, it doesn't think my host environment is development, which would explain why it's not trying to load user secrets. If I F11 again and step into it, so this is now doing a string comparison, so I must be pretty close. The environment name, development, host environment, div. So that doesn't look quite the same. And if we look closely, we can see that if we do view, there's a typo here. So that would explain it. So where does this come from? I'm just going to Control C. I'm going to do Control Shift and F and find that. And I can see in my launch settings, there's a typo. So at some point I must have accidentally got rid of the E. So that's a small example of investigating an issue by stepping into third-party code. Now I did that whilst debugging, but if I stop debugging and I go to program, just like remember how you can control click or press F12 to go to our own definitions, you can do that with third-party code as well. So if I control and you can see that if I hover the mouse, I get that cursor, that hand cursor. If I click on it, it does the same thing. So I'm not debugging now, I'm just clicking into it. I can click on the new, so control click, going down. We know where it is now. So it was in here, control click, go down. It was in apply default app configuration, and we can go down and we can see add user secrets. We can even go into that and we can see what this is doing. Internal, we can see it's doing something with a path, which will be my user folder, add secrets file, and it's calling add JSON file on that secrets. So you can see how within this familiar environment, we can still step into code, even if it's not our own. Another JetBrains product called .peek, which is free to download, is a separate desktop application that allows you to disassemble .NET DLLs. But in Rider, we also have that functionality. So clicking here, Assembly Explorer, or the ... will be in here if it's not pinned. Then we can click on Open. We could load a .NET DLL. There's a few other options. You can explore a folder, open from GAC, and there's a few, you can save assemblies, so you can clear this list. If I just open something from the GAC as an example, anything really, then we can see we can start looking through these namespaces. If I go to like one of the classes, then we can see this code. So this Assembly Explorer is built in. I mentioned before about like this debug and release mode, and if something's compiled in release mode and things have been optimized, this concept of symbols. So you've probably seen if you've done .NET development that quite often when you build your application in the bin folder, you've got your DLL files, but you've also got something called a PDB file, the PDB extension next to it. And that stands for Program Database, and that holds a lot of debug information. If I go back to like program, and I'm going to run to this breakpoint again. Now, if you remember this modules tab, and I did mention in the first video in this module that I never really use this. And the reason is because if I'm stepping into third-party code, I just trust it's got the symbols from somewhere. But if you are curious, if I step into this F11 and go to the very top, and I can see that this is namespace Microsoft ASP.NET Core. So if I go to modules and find this, which is here, I can see the path. So if I right click and say navigate module location, then we can see where it is. So that's just in C program files, .NET shared, it's in the .NET stuff. There's no PDB next to it though. So if I close this and look along, so we've got the symbols column, we can see that this came from symbol source server. So Rider we've known to download this from a symbol server. If we go to settings, Control Shift and S, then there's a couple of places of interest. In tools, external symbols, it says use sources from symbols where available, allow downloading symbols from remote locations, enable private source link support. So I'll mention that in a sec. Decompile methods. So there's a few options here. Also in build, execute, and deployment, we've got the debugger, you've got symbol servers. So you can set up your own symbol servers for your private PDB files. That source link thing I mentioned is very cool. It's not a Rider thing, it's a .NET thing. So here we've got .NET source link and it talks all about it. And basically allows you within your NuGet packages to embed information that tells it about the source code, about where that comes from. And that could be like a GitHub repository so that when you're debugging into it, the tooling, in this case Rider, knows where to get the original source from, like on GitHub, and then it can use that information as you're debugging through. Going further into this is out of scope of this talk, but github.net SourceLink, this article provides a lot of information, and there's a lot of information online about SourceLink. So hopefully that gives you a good idea of stepping into third-party code and investigating not just in the debugger, but also just disassembling third-party code. In the next section, we're going to look at debugging multi-threaded code.